there everyone, Mobile360 here back again for another video. So, new versus old. It sure is a weird topic when it comes to the topic of media nowadays. Considering about how many things have changed from the past to the present, there's no denying that there's definitely been a bit of a decline in quality when it comes to stuff like video games. Whether it be the endless amount of microtransactions or games that turn out not to be so good at launch, it can't really put it past people to start comparing new versus old. Especially when there's also the subject of a lot of remakes, remasters, even reboots coming out. So of course, let us get into the video. So if there's one thing which should be pretty important to this discussion, it probably has to be the topic about change. Because when it comes to change, a lot of people would just prefer for a lot of big name franchises just stuck with the basics and stuck with the formula. And while that is pretty simple to say from the standpoint of someone that never touched a line of code in their lives, at the same time you gotta realize change is kind of a necessity when it comes to video games in general. Because sure, you can always just stick with a formula, but then at the same time you gotta realize that changing up the formula in a small but subtle way, or even drastic ways, can what make a series big in the first place. Like when Call of Duty went from the World War shooter to the more modern shooter, or as Halo progressively made small and subtle changes from Halo 1 to 3, but then made a huge one of Halo Reach, and so on, so forth. I feel like when it comes to change, that it also was a bit of a double-edged sword, because as I mentioned, as Call of Duty went from the World War II shooter to the modern shooter, it went from the modern shooter to trying to be the knockoff version of Titanfall. And while it did kind of work for 3 games, at the same time, it kind of fumbled. Same thing can be applied to Halo when it tried to take another drastic leap from what was Halo Reach 2.0, that was Halo 4, to Halo 5, which just felt like something completely different. But then, of course, there are some other cases to where a franchise can make some other changes that are drastic, but it turns out to be pretty good. Like when Resident Evil took the big leap from being the horror action game to an action horror game with Resident Evil 4, which outright inspired other games like the Dead Space series, which kind of followed in its footsteps, or Sonic Frontiers, which recently kind of took the series in a completely different direction, not only from its public reception, but when it came to its gameplay, by kind of mixing and matching a few things by just trying something completely different. So while there's no denying that change does have its negative aspects to it, I think you also gotta realize that change, at the end of the day, isn't ultimately a bad thing and can also come with some positive outcomes as well. So of course, let us continue on to shitty business practices. Now, when it comes to shitty business practices, these aren't anything that are necessarily new considering the circumstances, but at the same time, there's no denying that they've just gotten increasingly predatory over the years. From things like map packs that would separate a fan base because, oh, what is that? You thought you could just spend your money on the game and have all the content? Well, no. Or things like loot boxes, which even had a whole lawsuit following it that eventually had it banned. And now the dreaded loot box system, or not loot box, but Battle Pass and games as a service system. But one of the most important ones which we need to take into consideration has to be this discussion of games that are rushed during their development. Now, I'm pretty sure that nowadays we all know the end result of what happens when a group of developers aren't able to properly finish their game, thus resulting in a title that ends up becoming so infamous because of its launch that it ends up setting an entire precedent for how games should and shouldn't be made, like, I don't know, Cyberpunk 2077, in which even then some people haven't gotten the memo that if you rush developers that a game isn't gonna turn out as good at launch as opposed to way more later because, well, you rushed them instead of letting them do their job. And unfortunately, it's become a far more common trend than you think, with a lot of AAA games turning out to be completely broken and requiring a ton of patches in order for them just to be fairly functional. Like Jedi Survivor, for example, has turned out to have so much of a horrible launch that across all platforms it managed to be pretty choppy. Or hell, even one of my favorite games, Sonic Frontiers, despite its performance being pretty well, you can tell that the developers are rushed towards the ending, and now that they have an entire DLC roadmap, a lot of that stuff is most likely features that were supposed to be in the game in the get-go. But not only does this affect games that are in the single-player space, but also in the multiplayer space as well. Like, have you ever wondered about why so many games end up being live service sales nowadays as opposed to just big, normal games? Well, it's most likely because of some corporate suit going like, hey, instead of just letting you be able to fix the game at launch, how about we just have you fix the game as it's out already, thus having the game being in a perpetual state of it being broken while you work overtime, or the end result varying on how much you enjoy the game or if you just outright abandon it. But I think this is the part where we can just continue. Now, at the end of the day, I understand struggle. Rather it be being a fan of a long-running franchise which has lost its spark over the years of, or just waiting for a sequel to a game which just turned out to be less than stellar. There's no denying that there will always be mid or just bad games out there, but despite that, I don't feel like gaming has outright died or that games have just stopped being good, because some of the best games out there are just sitting right under your nose, and I feel like that's one of the things that many people fail to do, which is just expand their reach. For example, I'm not the type of guy to really play rhythm games or beat 'em ups, but at the same time, I really like TIE Rush, and I really liked Zone of the Enders. And I know I have two completely different games, but you're getting my point. And I feel like the same thing can be applied to so many titles out there, because sure, Call of Duty and so many other big franchises are like a comfort food for many people. It's just kind of hard to let go of them after you've played them for so long. But you want to know what? I feel like in a time like right now, to where despite there being an oversaturation of games out there, there's a perfect opportunity to just play something you never even thought of trying before and just having a good time. Because I feel like life is just way too short to be constantly making videos bitching about Call of Duty and then just buying the next game and whatnot. And that's all I really had to say, folks. But before this video ends off, I think it's fair that I address my upload schedule, because man, this video just took way more longer than I thought it would. Now, personally speaking, I don't really like to make a big deal out of me like disappearing for like a few days, let alone a week, but man, just the fact that I ran into so many inconveniences while recording this and now editing this is honestly wild. But you know what, aside from that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope to see y'all in another video coming soon, and see you in my next upload. Later, folks.